Speaking of distinguished, that means it's time to go 180 degrees from that adjective by introducing the next several speakers. So, starting with Mr. Carmen Hicks, one of our top industrial brokers. He's also known as the only industrial broker in the entire country who can pull off a bow tie. He's not doing that today, but take my word for it, it's pretty good. He just recently helped broker what is a pretty historic transaction for Denver, the 169-acre sale for land for the Walmart deal that you heard Mark talking about earlier. Carmen also recently had a son, so any bags you see under his eyes are probably attributed to lack of sleep as opposed to working too hard. Next, I'd like to introduce the oldest member of our panel, Mr. Pat Stucker. Pat has been around since the formation of the Rocky Mountains, and not long after that, running the JLL multifamily department here in Denver. Pat, welcome. He's completed apartment deals in over 15 states and has a transaction volume of over $4 billion. As the head of real estate investment banking, Baxter Fain is too big to fail. He's been in the business for over 20 years and has completed $6 billion in transactions. He does all assets, office, multifamily, self-storage, you name it. He also holds the office record for most frequent smiler. Greg Bonte is going to join us up here simply because of his hair. But as a managing director with the tenant rep group in our office, we also thought he'd bring a really good pocket square and a great perspective to the panel. Thank you. Greg's been involved with some pretty recent transactions, including the Comcast deals in the Southeast suburban market, and is currently working on Encana here in downtown. Last, and most certainly least, Mr. Kevin Foley, representing the agency leasing team. Kevin specializes in the leasing and marketing of some marquee properties here in downtown Denver, including Wells Fargo Center and the Tabor Center. His leasing skills are what make him a living, but his true passion is stocks. So Kevin, what do you got on today? Anything good? Yeah, all right, there we go. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming up. I want to kick off the panel with Pat and get your perspective, piggybacking off what we were talking about with Adam earlier. It seems like everywhere, every corner of the block, there's a crane, there's an apartment building going up. Is the apartment market being overbuilt?
So the simple answer is yes.
Done. Goodbye.
My grade school teacher, and when I'm talking about a grade school teacher, we're talking about turn of the century, always taught me math doesn't lie. And so the numbers are pretty simple. The apartment marketplace consists of about 300,000 apartment units today in Metro Denver. We've got 23,000 apartment units under construction. Those will be delivered over the next 2 years. Behind that, there's 22,000 units in planning and permitting. We're currently absorbing around 7,000 units per year. Our deliveries for 2017 and 2018 look like they're going to average somewhere between 10 and 12,000 units. Okay. So supply will outstrip demand by about 3,000 to 4,000 units a year. That's going to equate to an increase in vacancy of somewhere around 1 to 1.5% per year. So that's the bad news. But the corresponding good news is that it looks like the lending industry is going to police itself in new apartment construction. We think that of the 22,000 units in planning and permitting, only about half of those will receive funding approval over the next 2 years. Baxter may want to talk to that a little later on. If you really look at what's going on in Denver with population growth of between 50 and 60,000 people a year, Denver still has great demand. The housing industry, while it's recovering, is still not creating the number of housing units that is currently needed. Our estimate is that since 2008, there's about a 50,000 unit deficit in housing units. We think that that's not going to be filled for several years. And so with that number of people moving in, the volume of millennials that are moving into this marketplace, that demand is going to continue to be strong. but we're still experiencing a very severe housing shortage.
Right. We'll come back to that in a little bit. I want to jump onto something you said with Bernie Baxter. What trends are you seeing, lender and institutional demand, and what all of those trends mean for Denver, both now and also in the near term?
Yeah, we're starting to see some tightening going on, and it really feels like just in the last 90 days or so. There's give or take $3 trillion of commercial real estate debt in the United States, and historically about 50% of those loans are done by banks. So we're starting to see banks get very particular on construction, particularly multifamily, hotels, and anything that's spec. We're starting to hear a lot that, while we agree Denver market is wonderful, we want to see how this stuff leases up that we've already agreed to do, and then we'll look at doing some more. We're starting to see banks really save their dry powder for their existing customers or new customers that they've been trying to get into the bank, primarily because their commercial real estate portfolios have grown so much in the last 4 or 5 years. That combined with the mountain of regulations that we're hearing Trump talk so much about lately is having an impact. Within Dodd-Frank, there's a couple things. One is HVCRE, high volatility commercial real estate, that requires developers to put in 15% cash on as complete value on new projects. What that's really translating is the old land entitlement business where you buy a piece of land, get it entitled, a year later you're ready to go. They're not going to give you that today's value equity. You've got to put in cash. That combined with CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Board, it's all here to protect us as consumers. And candidly, I think a lot of those rules are going to start really limiting construction. On the other side, we're seeing investors have a huge demand in Denver. Life insurance companies, CMBS lenders are still volatile with their lending. The only exception really are the agencies. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD are still extremely aggressive in Denver. All of them say the same thing, that they want to invest in Denver.
Okay. Well, piggybacking off some of the economic trends and demographic trends you heard Tom Clark talk about in this morning's keynote, how, Carmen, is Denver's growing population impacting the distribution? And e-commerce mentioned, the market talked about some of that a little bit earlier. But from your perspective, what are you seeing as some of the primary growth drivers?
Well, I definitely think from an industrial perspective, it's becoming the new retail. When you look at some of the bigger deals that are taking place in our market, as McLean coming into the market, Best Buy, Amazon, and then the Walmart deal that my team was a part of. I mean, it's just setting a new precedent, I think, for where we're going on the industrial market. I think population breeds growth. I mean, when I look at myself, I mean, I've become a VIP member of Amazon Prime, So I think things that, when you see things like that happen, I think it's really great to see what's happening in our market. But I think those industry drivers are really, to me, food and beverage. You look at healthcare, and of course e-commerce. And I think those are all things that are directly tied with the growth of our Metro Denver market.
Yeah. I want to jump to the office sector for a second. So Kevin, just general trending, what are you seeing currently in the office world?
I really have no idea. I don't know what's going on in the market. Really, let me digress for one quick second. Peter, you're a millennial, I believe. Who was the author of A Tale of Two Cities?
Charles Dickens.
All right, just checking. I was just checking. Okay, just making sure you're
Did you have to look that up?
not just a Snapchat guy. From an office perspective, the trends I'm seeing, I guess from a tenant perspective, what I see, efficiency seems to be a driving factor right now. I see that kind of across the board in all industry segments, whether it's lawyers, tech companies, obviously. Nowadays, we always talk about ratios and things like that. The tech companies particularly, they just want to know how many bodies they can get in the space. So, when we do marketing, we're always trying to just tell them how many people you can get on the floor. Proximity to employees, I think, is something we see on the tenant side. That kind of leads up to wanting to have access to light rail and public transportation. And we're seeing a desire on the tenant side for a lot of flexibility. So flexibility in term, flexibility in a lot of aspects of the lease. It's a kind of a difficult proposition right now because really what you're seeing is higher costs across the board, as we talked about on the panel. What it takes to transact a deal. Construction costs, we all know, have risen dramatically, and so you're a little bit of a loggerhead in terms of tenants' desire for flexibility versus what it costs to transact a deal, which generally requires more term. So that's kind of where we're trying to find solutions between tenants' needs and landlords' needs. From a landlord perspective, it's kind of been about investing in their assets over the last 5 years or so. In Denver, a lot of the stock is 30 plus years old, and so we've seen a lot of investment in properties here, particularly in the downtown area where I spend a lot of time. I think in the top 15 to 20 properties downtown, there's been somewhere between $4 to $5 million on average of investment in the properties. And a lot of that's just to bring them to current standards. We're seeing landlords focusing on their amenity base, and I think that's a function of tenants want to be able to provide these amenities to their millennial and other employees, and so we as landlords have to kind of partner with them in that sense. So big focus on the amenity base in these buildings and adding new amenity offerings to the buildings.
Right, yeah, we've seen that. I mean, multifamily office is no different. This is just happening throughout. Greg, Bob and Chris earlier were each unique in the sense that they had offices in multiple markets. And so I'm curious, as a tenant rep broker, what are you seeing in your clients? Are they looking to maybe either jump market inside entirely or do satellite offices? How's that all playing out?
Peter, it really, there we go. Peter, it really depends on the nature of the group you're trying to accommodate. If you're a technology-oriented company, chances are you want to have a presence in the core or around the core. Your workforce would predominantly be millennials, and as you heard Chris mention earlier, millennials like to work, play, and live within a small radius. So a lot of groups are trying to accommodate that. If 10%, according to the Downtown Denver Partnership, 10% of companies downtown are technology-oriented, which is, I thought, pretty amazing. I read that this week. And over the last few days, we've all felt a buzz downtown with the Denver Startup Week. So that's just further reinforcement. That's a place that technology groups want to be. If you're an outside sales type organization, you also likely want to have a presence toward the core. You want to be more on the periphery so that you can access the transportation arteries, so this sales force can access their prospects and clients on a more readily, easily basis up and down the Front Range. Now, on the other hand, if you're more of a back office operation, and even some old industry or old economy industries, a lot of them are starting to look outside due to the expenses and leave the core, or at least explore leaving the core. Now, you can access really great buildings, a variety of buildings, southeast, northeast, northwest, and you've got a more abundant parking situation, a much cheaper parking. Parking's getting a lot more expensive, especially downtown. But if they need to be downtown, they can easily jump on the light rail. With 20, 30 minutes, you're downtown at your meetings. We're working with an energy company right now that's exploring this very strategy.
Okay. Baxter, for the benefit of the investors in the room, what's your prognosis on the cap rate and interest rates playing out? And maybe touch on just some briefly different sectors as well.
Sure. It seems like the entire world that I'm in, debt, equity, sales, revolves around, what's the Fed going to do? What are rates going to do? I've said, I think for 5 years that rates are going to go up. The 10-year Treasury has gone from, 2.5% a year ago to 1.36% in July after Brexit. Today it's up to 1.7%. So while it's been volatile, it's still a 10-year Treasury below 2%, which is historically incredibly low. So as a result, we're seeing cap rates staying low, primarily in the core products, Class A office CBD, Class A multifamily. We're working on a transaction now where an institutional buyer is buying an apartment deal here in town. We're doing a $67 million loan at 50% loan to purchase. A life insurance company actually beat out the agency's 10 years interest only at 3.07%. So that firm can afford to pay a 4 cap and get positive leverage. It's nuts. Then you move 20 miles to the south, to some more of a suburban area where you look at maybe Class B office or maybe a limited service hotel project, and we're hoping we get a 9 cap. So as a result, we're also seeing lenders get back to really risk-adjusted pricing. before the crisis came out, you had 5 or 10 basis points in between where lenders would price a deal. It didn't matter if it was a dog house or a multifamily house or what it was. Well, today, you're seeing 50 to 100 basis point differences in rates from property quality. So, so goes cap rates, so goes interest rates, and I think rates are going to still stay low because even today, retail sales came out in the month of August, and it's gone down less than people expected, in addition to industrial production. So now there's a 20% likelihood the Fed's going to raise rates next week. I almost want them just to do it. So I think we're going to stay low for a while.
Yeah, okay. Well, Pat, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, slight increase in supply coming on, vacancy rates, a point and a half a year. We're coming off the heels of pretty substantial increases in rents in Denver over the past several years. Is that alone going to help dampen some of the increasing costs, or is it going to help balance rent?
Well, the supply is definitely going to have an effect on the rent increases that we've seen. But you have to look at you can't look at the apartment industry in a bubble. You have to look at the entire housing industry and what's going on in Metro Denver. And so there's really 3 forces that are affecting rents. And the first is a severe lack of affordable home construction. And what that's doing is forcing would-be home buyers to remain in the renter pool. The second force is the migration to affordability. And so what's happening is you've seen average rents across the metro market go up by 60% over the last 5 or 6 years. Average household median income has only gone up about 2.5%. So middle income residents are moving more to older properties, and they're moving to more suburban locations. So that's really good for B and C grade apartments. The last force is this positive in-migration in Denver. So ever since the downturn, we're still experiencing about 30,000 people net in migration every year. I mean, rough numbers indicate that that's 250,000 people. That includes 10 to 12,000 millennials every year, so there's 60,000 millennials. So despite the fact that we have amazing new apartment construction, Denver's still in somewhat of a housing crisis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, to the point about increasing costs, Greg, on the office side of things, there's been a big ramp up in building valuations. There's been obviously increasing real estate taxes, and I'm not even going to go to the metropolitan districts per se. Rental rates, of course, have followed suit. So how are these increasing costs impacting your clients? Do you have anybody who's saying, forget Denver, I'm out, or either I'm leaving downtown or I'm just leaving this market entirely?
Peter, I kind of less than a handful of folks that have specifically said, hey, we're going to the suburbs because downtown taxes are way too expensive. Some may be doing that, some are doing that, but they're not doing it in great numbers or moving out in droves. But if you're a group that really wants to be downtown or has to be downtown, those groups are getting very creative on if it's a budgetary issue, they're either going to a more affordable building toward uptown, they're going for a more efficient, more flexible plan. We've heard that earlier from the previous panel. And they're just making it happen. They're making it happen. So a couple of groups that come to mind are Ibotta and Ping Identity downtown. We're predominantly millennial workforce, and they said, you know what, we need to be downtown for the location. So they went a little bit uptown. They went into some older but really nicely refurbished high-rise towers, built out some really amazing spaces that'll attract all generations to come there, made it their own, on some occasions sold or saved over $20 per square foot per year, and they took those savings and reinvested them into their talent and into their technology.
Okay. Well, in speaking to the Tale of Two Cities theme, Carmen, we've got tight supply, great for landlords, obviously not so great for occupiers as their rents go up. So what headwinds are impacting the ability for your clients to grow and make bigger bets in this market?
Well, I would start by looking at the vacancy in our market. We're roughly at 3%. And I think if you're looking at that as a landlord, I think that's some runway for us to bring on new and more product online. I mean, I think currently if we were to bring on roughly, I think there's 2 million square feet planned, that would only bring us to about 5.5%, 6% vacancy, which is still right there or just below the national curve of 6.1.
Okay.
So I think that's something that if I was a landlord, I think there's an opportunity to still grow and expand your footprint in this market. Secondly, from a landlord's perspective, with all the redevelopment and everything that's happening, especially in the central market with the multifamily projects, the redevelopments that happen in, say, Rhino, you have a lot of displaced tenants. I mean, so there's still a lot of demand out there for space that we don't have. So again, I think that's another point that bodes well for landlords. If I flip my hat and look at it from a tenant's perspective, I think we're right at the beginning or the verge of seeing a pushback on these high rents. I mean, in the market, you can see rents as high as $8 to $9 triple net, which is astronomical, you know, when I look at when I first started in this business. So I think with that, I think there will be opportunities, you know, for higher TI packages and potentially some more free rent over what we've been seeing the last, say, 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Well, Kevin, looking at the CBD specifically, you know, we heard a little talk earlier about the Lodo factor. Lodo seems to be capturing a disproportionate amount of activity, smaller submarket in downtown, yet most of the tenant demand. What's your prognosis for the upper CBD over the next couple of years?
To the moon! You can tell I list a lot of buildings in the upper CBD with some fantastic clients. You know, you're right, Peter. I mean, there has been a little bit of a trend towards the lower CBD. Personally, I refer to them as the Lodo Lemmings. But I found that marketing strategy hasn't worked very well for me. But you know, that all being said, there has been that trend over the past few years where Lodo's maybe captured a little bit more than its fair share of the tenant activity. But I do have an optimistic prognosis for the upper part of the CBD, kind of over the short and the long term. You know, we're seeing it a lot. You know, Greg mentioned a few deals. There's, you know, SendGrid, Ibotta, 2U, Model N, Zayo. Some of these are just downtown, but a lot of these companies have picked the upper CBD. Some of them coming from outside of downtown, such as Transamerica. Some of them that were actually in the lower part of downtown that made the decision to move up. Denver Investment Advisors, U.S. Attorney's Office. A lot of those went the other direction, so we've seen a little bit of that. You know, of course, a lot of that is price. You know, rents are cheaper in the upper half of downtown. Taxes are substantially different in downtown. You combine them together, and the spread between lower downtown and upper downtown is pretty substantial right now. But I think there's also a little bit of a millennial story gaining steam on the upper half of downtown. You know, you yourself had put together a heat map a while back, you know, showing where the millennials actually live, and the predominance of the millennials live on the south and east sides of downtown because that's where it's a little bit more affordable. They can't all afford to be in Union Station. So I think employers are noticing that. And I think the transportation story on the upper half of downtown has started to gain a little steam. You know, you've got Civic Center Plaza being renovated right now. I think that's going to be a fantastic addition to the upper half of downtown. That free metro ride has kind of enhanced that connectivity from upper to Union Station. So I think there's a transportation story that's gaining steam. And so I just think, generally speaking, tenants are realizing that there's a significant value play on the upper half of downtown. And I think that, you know, for pricing and other reasons, downtown, the upper part will continue to kind of survive the pullback in the energy sector.
Greg, is the Midtown and upper part of downtown have had to compete a lot, you know, for some of these deals. So from your perspective, what ways have you seen landlords getting creative in getting the deal?
Well, it's a good thing that landlords and asset managers are sensing the downturn because a lot of them are working a little bit harder for our tenants' leases. But also it's an election year, some uncertainty, as well as there's a lot of competition in subleases that the energy sector's dropped, a lot of competitively priced and very nicely appointed subleases that it is a reality. They have to compete with it. But what some of these landlords are doing to make it more attractive are being more flexible on the expansion and contraction components of the lease. The amenity packages that Kevin just talked about. I mean, some of these fitness centers that these landlords are putting in are as nice as anyone you'll find that's not in an office building. You've got larger tenant improvement allowances being offered. You know, we're at an all-time high for construction costs, so it's got to offset some of that. But there's some new energy codes that the city's mandating that are adding $5 to $10 per square foot in the building. Someone's got to pay for those. And if there is something left over, we have the flexibility to spend some of the allowance towards FF&E, towards moving expenses, and in some cases, they'll hire a JLL project manager to help out with that. There's some landlords are kind of cutting to the chase, and if they're a couple $3 off on the tenant improvement allowance, they'll say, you know, we'll turnkey it. And they've gotten the deal because of that. It's a nice way to kick off a partnership between the tenant and the landlord. Free rent is always a great thing to have. On one deal recently, it was a year of free rent was offered on a 7-year deal, somewhat unprecedented in the market. And then a non-economic issue, or when the asset manager and the lender are in lockstep, so they can work together proactively to get quicker responses. We all know that time kills deals. It's a good way to counteract that. So for the asset managers and landlords in the audience, I have a list of these and some more. I'll be handing them out at the tenant rep booth after the program.
Shameless plug, I like it. You know, Pat, on the multifamily side, in your previous discussion, you had mentioned a few different factors going on, and I kind of really want to dive deep for a second into just the for sale component. You know, record high home appreciation in Denver. Our median home prices skyrocketed over the past several years. So when you look at that specifically, what is that doing to impact multifamily?
So if you look at what's going on in the home market, the multiple listing service now, there's about 7,400 homes actively listed. They rate that as being around a 25 to 30-day supply. So, you know, you look at the demand for homes, new construction is still lagging. Demand is greater than, supply is outstripping demand on new home construction. And so we look at the average median income or home price, and that's $354,000 in Denver. That's gone up 13% since 1 year ago. If you look at the national average of median home price, it's around $240,000. So Denver's median home price is about 50% higher than the national median home price. Median home prices in Denver have gone up 67% over the last 5 years. So when you distill all of that down, while rents are continuing to increase, they're increasing at a much more moderate rate this year of around 6.5%. You still have increasing home prices. You still have the difficulty in qualifying for new loans. You still have the problem of large down payment for new homes, and you still have a housing industry that is not providing the type of supply that the metro area needs. All of that still equates to a really strong market for the apartment industry.
Okay. Baxter, there's been a huge shift in the market fundamentals in Denver's real estate. You know, we've heard that kind of as a consistent theme here. Comparing itself to prior cycles, what does that mean for investors going forward? You know, what is Denver going to look like tomorrow?
You know, investors, when I say investors, that's both lenders and equity investors, really no longer look at Denver as a secondary market, and they no longer look at Denver as a boom and bust town. You know, it's not an oil town, it's not a technology town, it's kind of everything. You combine that with what Tom was mentioning earlier this morning in terms of all the news releases around the country with our light rail and our airport and 7 professional sports teams and, you know, the in-migration number of 30,000 a year. I mean, lenders in New York, California, Texas, I mean, they know that now. Every meeting, almost without fail, I hear we're underinvested in Denver. So while banks begin to peel back, For example, we're out with several construction loans right now, and I'm guessing none of them will be with banks. They'll all be with alternative funding sources that love Denver, that understand Denver, and are very bullish on Denver. Not to mention, there's a large universe of mezzanine lenders out there where lenders today maybe get to 65 or 70% leverage. Well, their loan's coming due and they're at an 80% loan to value. The developer didn't put enough reserves in their pockets, so they're stuck. So we're doing a lot of mezzanine loans up to 80% to fund that. And because the senior loan interest rate is so low, the blended cost of that loan is still extremely attractive for them. So moving forward, I think about where we were 8 years ago today. 8 years ago today is when Lehman Brothers collapsed. We are in such an amazing spot today compared to where we were 8 years ago. And, candidly, we're pretty blessed to live in Denver. When I go home to Missouri to visit family, there's not a lot of cranes there. As opposed to when I look around here, there's cranes everywhere. I don't know, So, looking forward, Denver is really a pretty incredible market today as it was in the past.
Okay. Mark Bowen said something earlier about talking about where we are in the cycle and related to investment, or to innings in a baseball game. So I want to put the panelists on the spot and do a little bit of a lightning round. Curious to know your collective responses to the same question. Where are we in the cycle? And Carmen, I'll start with you.
Say top of the eighth.
Top of the eighth. All right, Pat?
I think we're right at the start of the 7th inning.
Okay, Baxter?
I think we're top of the 8 with extra innings and some new ball players coming into the game.
Greg?
Middle of the ninth.
Okay, Kevin?
Ouch. Middle of the ninth. I would say I'm in the 7th inning stretch right now. That's about where we're at downtown.
Guys, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts on the Tale of Two Cities theme. I think we've got 1 or 2 minutes if there's a question, or maybe 2 at most out there. If not, we can wrap things up. Anybody out there? All right.
Can't really see.
Yes, Patrick.
Pat Stucker, it seems like a lot of the apartment market's strength relies on the fact that the home builders aren't building enough houses. Why are they not building enough houses? I mean, on the fringe of Denver, there's a lot of land to build single-family houses. Why are they not being able to keep up with that demand?
Well, I think it's more a question of being able to build affordable houses. And affordable houses, like I said, there's 7,400 homes on the multiple listing service right now. Only 15% of those are at or below $300,000 in price. I think there's a combination of why, one, a lot of home builders went out of the business from the last downturn. I think that there is a slow process in getting entitlements and taking the risk to provide new home construction lots. And so I think the industry is starting to recover, and I think that they'll probably build about 10,000 homes in the Denver metro area this year, and that's growing, and it's they're working to get there. But and then costs have gone up, and so to deliver a house that is less than $400,000 is a very difficult process unless you go quite a ways out into the suburbs.
And Patrick, I'm working on some residential lot deals right now, none of which are bank funded. And what we're seeing south of 470, for example, to finish a lot, water taps, engineering, civil, everything is $50,000 to $60,000 a lot. And then you have to buy the land. So it's tough for a home builder to buy a finished lot in this town for under $100,000. And if they're still trying to hit 20% their lot basis to purchase, sales price, all of a sudden you're at a $500,000 home.
Well, guys, thanks again for taking the time this morning. Appreciate it. As we do every year, all content related to research and everything you've heard about in this morning's program will be hosted on our event website, denverhorizon.com. Feel free to visit there. You can download a PDF of the report, which was placed on your chairs, and feel free to share it with any colleagues or anybody you think might find value out of it. Before we go, I would like to take a quick second to recognize some of my colleagues. It takes a lot of effort to pull off our annual Horizon event. So to that end, Christina, Brianna, Alex, Dominic, Margaret, Mandy, TJ, Corey, thank you. Appreciate your help. And lastly, I really want to thank all of you in the audience. You know, as Barry mentioned at the outset of our program, we strongly value the trust and confidence you place in JLL, and we truly appreciate your continued business and support. Hopefully you found this morning informative. Thank you for your time, and hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.